If you clicked on this video hoping to find me dunk on stupid Shounen fans for 10 minutes, then congratulations, you got played. What I will be talking about, however, is the danger of essentialization and why we should stop emphasizing manga demographics so much. Now, for those who are unaware, there are 4 main manga demographics, each of which denoting a specific age and gender. Shonen manga are for young boys, while seinen are for adult men, and shoujo manga are for young girls, while josei are for adult women. So, how exactly does it work? Well, it's simple. Different manga magazines market themselves towards specific audiences. Weekly Shonen Jump, for example, publishes manga for its target demographic of young boys. Thus, any manga it publishes will receive the title of shonen. And that's all there is to it. Naruto and Bleach are not shonen manga by virtue of being action series or making use of certain tropes. They are shonen because they're published in a shonen magazine. Likewise, Berserk is not seinen because it's dark and edgy, but because the magazine it's published in, Young Animal, is specifically targeted towards adult males. That being said, there's considerable debate over the influence of a demographic on a manga story. Some individuals insist that a manga's demographic will have certain consequences on its story, and to some extent, that's true. Manga aimed at an older demographic, such as seinen or josei, are less restricted in terms of the graphic content they can depict. They're free to depict violence and sexuality as much as they want, whereas manga aimed at a younger demographic are more limited in this respect. So while there's a certain sense in which this influences a manga story, it's a very narrow sense. In general, however, a manga being shonen does not necessarily entail any narrative content. You don't have to focus on friendship, effort, and victory to be a shonen manga. And likewise, any manga that focuses on these things is not necessarily a shonen. This should make sense because in the same way that not every 16-year-old guy is the same, not every manga aimed at 16-year-old guys will be the same. Now, although the demographic at large does not necessarily influence a manga story, the magazine it's published in may, and this ties directly back to my previous point. Weekly Shonen Jump has carved out a very specific target demographic. Not simply all young boys, but young boys with an affinity towards certain core themes, namely friendship, effort, and victory. But not every shonen magazine has this same niche carved out. Something like Basatsu Shonen magazine, for instance, attempts to capitalize on young boys who have more mature interests, with titles such as Attack on Titan and Flowers of Evil, 2 series that, might I add, are often mistaken for seinen. Now you might be wondering how the specific magazine may influence a manga story, yet the demographic at large does not. Well, allow me to explain. Suppose you're an aspiring mangaka, and it's your lifelong goal to have a manga published in Weekly Shonen Jump. How should you approach this? Should you simply create whatever you want and just pray it's good enough to get in? Or should you take notes of certain trends and narrative structures present in the most popular titles in the magazine, and build your story from that? Well, if you're looking to achieve your goal, then the answer should be obvious. You do the latter. And in fact, once you submit your draft, editors might insist that you make farther changes to fit in line with the core themes and structures of the magazine. So in this way, the specific magazine may shape the manga that it publishes for their specific audience. However, this shaping is specific to the magazine. What Weekly Shonen Jump may want from a manga is evidently not the same as in Basatsu Shonen magazine. This is why I stress that it is not the demographic which has this influence on the story, but the specific magazine, as demographics are not these homogeneous genres as they are sometimes depicted. Let's bring this all back to the main theme of today's video. Why should we stop emphasizing these demographics? Well, for one, as we've seen, the demographics themselves are not very informative. They simply tell us the target demographic for the magazine it's published in, which does not communicate anything regarding narrative content or patterns of storytelling. So, by simply asserting that some series is a shonen, you're not communicating anything meaningful. But my more pressing point is that emphasizing demographics in the way we do online feeds into the animosity among fans. The more we talk about these demographics, the more significance they obtain. The problem with this is that, at the same time, there's this trend of people identifying with their demographic, and perhaps rightfully so, but we must acknowledge how this is negatively playing out in the discourse. These discussions have fostered a certain in-group, out-group mentality between those who identify with these demographics. This, I think, is expressed quite clearly in such remarks as, "I only read seinen because all shonen are the same immature action series," or, "I don't read shoujo because it's all boring romance." I mean, how often do we see people say that they only read manga of one demographic, and that the other demographics are somehow both the same and worse? What we are witnessing is the problem of essentialization. People are using these broad demographics as categories by which they can group together massive sets of manga with the sole intention of reducing them to some common trait. For example, the idea that all shonen manga are somehow mindless action, or that all shoujo manga are boring romance, it only takes 10 seconds of research to realize just how varied each demographic can be. But when we enter into this in-group, out-group mentality, we lose all charitability towards the others, and we do whatever it takes to put them down so long as it means propping ourselves up. Thus, it does not matter if not all shoujo are romance series. If I'm a shonen fan who only has animosity towards shoujo fans, then I will use these categories in a way that will put them down, and vice versa. This applies to all demographics, or at least all the fans that are using these demographics in this way. The more people are met with this kind of behavior, the more they will respond in a similar fashion. It's thus a never-ending cycle. Shonen fans reduce all shoujo manga to romance in an attempt to belittle it, while shoujo fans then reduce all shonen to action to retaliate, and so on. As we can see, not only are demographics relatively meaningless when it comes to communicating anything significant about a manga story, but in practice they tend to be used in a toxic way that only fosters animosity and not enjoyment. So what's my solution? Well, instead of being so fixated on the demographic of a manga, why not focus on the genre? Why does it have to be shonen romance versus shoujo romance? Why can't it just be romance, where each party brings to the table what their series uniquely offers to the genre? In this way, we can actually talk about something concrete and meaningful while also dissolving this in-group, out-group mentality. And by taking this approach, perhaps others will be more willing to explore other titles within the genre they otherwise wouldn't have. Again, as long as we have this animosity between the demographics, a shoujo fan who likes action might be reluctant to get into any shonen action series. Likewise, a shonen fan that likes romance might be reluctant to get into any shoujo romance because of the animosity between the demographics. This animosity dissolves any charitability towards the other demographics, and as a result we get this essentialization. All shoujo are boring romance, all shonen are mindless action. And so as long as we play into this kind of in-group, out-group mentality that's going on, the more bad faith that will arise, and people will be less willing to check out manga and other demographics despite liking certain genres within them. And to be clear, I'm not blaming any particular demographic or its fans for this kind of behavior. I'm simply diagnosing something that I see every day on my timeline on Twitter and attempting to prescribe a solution that I think will be helpful for everyone and only foster a more healthy community within which we can discuss our favorite things. But anyways, what do you think? Leave a comment below with your thoughts on the situation, and until next time, peace and love, baby.